Welcome to the Crafts Are My Vice tutorial for making imitation beaded jewelry with rubber bands using a loom. I also have a tutorial using wood sticks as another method for making this project. So here are some examples. This is what I refer to as a small bead, a 3-row bead. And this would be a larger bead using 5 rows. And here's an example of a boy's necklace that goes all the way around, or a choker. And I have put this together with some clasps because that probably won't fit over somebody's head as long as the necklace is pretty tight around the neck. And here's an example of a larger bead using more bands in each row. And there, of course, can be variations on the chain. And so I also want to talk about band selection. So it is fairly important because you don't want all that hard work to go to waste. So for the chain, it really can be anything. However, the bands that are on either side of a bead are capped and need to be pulled real tight in order to pull those bands together to look like a bead. So for instance, this one has broken, so this is a metallic band that's very stretchy. So for the bands that are on either side of the bead, I would suggest choosing a band that is not overly stretchy. However, for the bead itself, a stretchy band is actually easier to work with. So there's that. Now, when we're talking about how many bands you'll need for the project, so I've figured that the chain part of a necklace, it uses about 8 bands to make up an inch, and the first part of the chain can be measured usually from the back of the neck to about the collarbone, and mine ends up usually being about 8 inches. But certainly you can make it to your desired length. And then for bracelets, anywhere from 28 to 32 bands that make up the chain. For a necklace, anywhere from 100 to 150 bands usually works. To make the beads, it's 5 bands per row or more. I wouldn't use any less than that because then you don't have as much distinction between the chain and the bead. So for instance, for making 5 small beads, 3 rows in each bead and 2 colors, color A, which would be the blue, would be 50 bands, and then color B would be 25 bands, the green. Then if you were to make a large beaded item, if you were to do the boys, this one is about 15 beads. So for 3 rows to make up the bead in 2 colors, color A, the black, would be 150 black bands, and color B, 75 bands, which would be the green. And then the chain, this one used 64 white bands. Okay, and back to the 3 large beads. This is 5 rows to make up the bead, 2 colors, so color A, being the fuchsia, was 45 bands, and color B, the pink, 30 bands. So hopefully that gives you some idea of how many bands the project will require. Okay, what you'll need for this project is 1 loom, a hook. I prefer using a metal hook, but I do think it's possible to use your plastic hook. We'll just need to be careful when we're doing the bands so as not to break that hook. You'll also need a way to clasp your project, so certainly a C-clip would work. What I like to use is 2 jewelry jump rings and 1 C-clip, or 2 jump rings and a clasp. And then if you're using the jump rings, it is easier if you use a ring splitter. Okay, so to configure the loom, we're going to take it completely apart. And then for the first row, we'll put one of these shorter segments, starting at about the fourth slot. Then we'll take our second row and we're going to turn it the opposite direction and place it so that it's about halfway. And we're going to place it offset so that they are not aligned. We're going to make a triangular configuration, and actually we're going to use these two pegs that are what we're going to work off of. So now we're going to secure it just a little bit more by putting this other holder. Okay. Now we'll take our larger piece and put it all the way to the edge. And then this piece is going to go right up against this peg so that they are facing back to back, and this makes it just a little bit easier to hook because there'll be a point where we're going to have many bands around all these three and we're going to need to hook over, so that makes it just a little bit easier to access. Okay, so to get started, if you are going to use a jump ring, so my chain, we're going to start with the chain. My chain is going to be white. If you're going to be using a jump ring, now it's a good time to put that first ring on. So we're just going to thread it through the hole, and we're going to be working off of these 3 pegs. I'm going to place this over 2 pegs. Take my hook, take the far side of the band and stretch it over that 3rd hook, and pretty much just ignoring that ring. If you're going to be using a C-clip, you do the exact same thing, just pretend that that ring is not there. We'll take our next band, put it around all 3 and loop. Around all 3 and loop. So if you're going to be doing a bracelet with small beads, about 4 is just fine. We're going to cap the 4th one, double it. If you're going to be doing a necklace, like I'm going to demonstrate, then anywhere from 50 to 65 bands usually works. I can measure from the back of the neck, and usually starting about the collarbone is where I start the beads, but it's certainly up to you. So I'm going to let you continue on if you're doing a necklace, making that first part of your chain. So that would be this part, and then we're going to stop right there, pick up, and I will demonstrate the beginning of the beads. Okay, so I've completed the first part of my chain. Mine ended up being about 8 inches long. And then we'll do one more chain band, and it needs to be capped or doubled. So I'm going to fold that in half, put that around, you can put it either around 1 peg or 2, and then use your hook to stretch it around. Loop like normal. Push that way down. So I'm going to demonstrate a 3 bead necklace, and I'm going to use Spider-Man colors. It's going to be red, blue, red. So here I'm going to stack 5 red, and 5 blue. So I like stacking my colors like that so that I know exactly which one comes next, because it can get a little bit confusing once you've gotten started. So I take all 5 and pull it around all 3 pegs and loop. And they don't need to be stacked real neatly. And then push way down as far. You do have to constantly keep your loom together. Push down as far as you can. And here's the second color. Around all 3 pegs and loop. And it's certainly okay to loop more than once on a color, and if you're using a plastic hook, it's probably best to do at least 2. Do it twice so that you don't break your hook. And I'm just checking to make sure that I got all the red bands over. There we go. So our last row for a small bead. Hooking all those bands over. So this is where I think it's worth it to configure the loom like this so that you can access all those bands. Okay, and now for a chain in between the beads. Again, I set out, so for the small beads, 4 chain bands in between works fine. If you're doing a larger bead, then 5 at least. Otherwise the necklace doesn't bend like it should. For bracelets, usually 4 is just fine. So I'm doubling this one, placing it around all 3 pegs, loop, be sure to capture both bands from that doubled band. Okay. So really it's only 2 singles. And it's time for a doubled band again. You can put it around just the 1 peg and stretch it across the other 2, or all 3. Okay, push down, and again I'm going to line up my bands for the bead. 5. That's 5, is it? Yep. Push way down. And this is where you're going to have to start pushing that first bead through the loom. through the hole of that loom. I do try to make very sure that I've captured all of the one color. From some angles it's easier to capture all five when you're holding the loom in your hand. It's easier to get that right, that easier access angle. Okay, and then the next one's going to be capped. I'm going to set out my 4. And I will let you continue on until you have finished the beads. Make sure you cap or double on both sides of the beads. I like to do an odd number of beads. And then after that, finish up your chain. So if you've counted out how many were in the first part of your chain, you can just count them out or measure. Like I said, mine ended up being 8 inches, so you can measure yours. And then we'll be right back to finish up your project. So as you can see, the bands look a little big. So what I like to do is to try and pull those together by giving a tug and a wiggle, I guess, on each end. So grab it as close to the bead as possible and give that a tug. And I think this is where using the method of the wood skewers comes in handy, is to make those beads real tight, even in the middle. But regardless, you always have to do this step of pulling them tight, even if you do use them on the wood skewers. So give that wiggle. And certainly don't pull too hard as to break a band. You'd hate to break a band at this late in the game, but there you go. Hopefully you've been able to do your chain, all your bands with the chain bands in between, and the last part of your chain. And we're ready to finish up. So we'll take all 3 of these bands and place them onto just one peg. Then we'll take all 3 bands and put them just on your hook. Whoops, well, I guess I can take my loom apart to get that through. Okay, so here we have our choice of clasping. So if you're going to use a C-clip, you could just pull those bands and then push your C-clip through all 3 of those bands, and you can use your hook on the other side. Capture 3 or 2 bands, whichever you prefer, on that end, and the same thing. Stretch them, put them on your C-clip, and you're done. So I'll be right back to demonstrate if you use jewelry rings. So if you're going to use the jump rings, and hopefully you've remembered to put that ring on at the very beginning, but if not, it's no big deal. You'll just put it on as I'm going to show you right now at this end. You take your ring, find where they meet, where the two ends meet, right there. Going to take your ring splitter and insert it right between those two rings, split the rings in other words. Pull your bands tight and capture either 2 or 3 of those bands. So, and I like to keep my bands stretched so as not to pinch and damage the bands as I'm putting this ring on. Okay, and there we have it. And so if you're going to use the 2 C-clips, then you just put the ring around that side and around this side, and there you have it. If you are going to use a clasp, and there's many different types of jewelry clasps, we apply that in the same way. Split the ring, it goes on the small end. And once you've got it started, you don't have to be quite as careful because it's not affecting the rubber bands. There we go. And there you have it. So I do hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Please click the like thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're interested in more. I have several tutorials in the works. I would love to see your creations on Facebook and Instagram. Much of what I make is available on Etsy. And again, thank you so much.